Today we're going to be looking at our second type of what we're calling special equations. And today's type is proportional or not proportional. Now, proportional equations are special because our y-intercept is 0, which is what makes it proportional. This might look familiar to you guys, y equals kx, because you look at proportional relationships in 7th grade and you talk about it using y equals kx. You've also been graphing proportional relationships all throughout our 8th grade year. These are equations that look like this. So for example, y equals 2x. And in the beginning of learning how to graph, you guys would say, well, where are we going to start? We don't have a y-intercept. And we said, well, we're going to fill that in with a 0, right? But we don't have to write that in our equation. This is a proportional relationship. So it's a graph that starts on 0. Our y-intercept is 0. And we're going to look today at telling if a relationship is proportional from a graph, from an equation, and from a table. And then we're actually going to go back and write the equations too. So this is a little bit of a review all around. So for each category, I'm going to give you guys an example that is proportional and an example that isn't. So first we're going to look from a graph. And from a graph, it needs to be a line, and it has to go through 0, 0. Now this graph, if I'm looking at this is proportional. It's as simple as it sounds. It's going through the origin. My b is 0. So this graph is proportional. Compared to this graph that is not. And this is not proportional because my b is not 0. It looks like b is about 2 in that, I'd be estimating, but it definitely is not going through the origin, so this graph is not proportional. Now for this type, looking from an equation, we need to have an x and a y. Y equals kx I wrote here because it's showing the y-intercept is 0. In 8th grade we wrote y equals mx. Those mean the same exact thing. M and K are variables to represent the slope. And what we're going to do to tell if an equation is proportional or not, although I already told you over here, we're going to get our y alone and see what the b is. So for this is a review how to move this around and get the y alone. Remember, we need to move our x term first. And if I do something to one side, I have to do it to the other. So here I'm going to subtract 6x. On both sides, and I'm left with negative 3y equals negative 6x plus 12. Next, I divide by negative 3 on every single term of that equation. So my y is alone, but I need to make sure to simplify over here. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2x, and 12 divided by negative 3 is negative 4. Now I know this is not proportional because I have a b of negative 4. If I graphed that, my y-intercept is negative 4. This equation is not proportional. Compared to this one that is, and just as a hint, looking over here, that's going to tell you something. I'm still going to review how to get that y alone. Just to be sure, I would add 5x on both sides, and I'm left with 2y equals 5x, and when I divide by 2, that gives me a slope of 5/2, 5 over 2. That means I would rise 5, run 2, starting at 0, right? I don't have plus anything there. It's plus 0, but we don't need to write that. So this would be proportional. This is a proportional relationship. Next I have from a table. And in 7th grade, you guys looked at tables and you found a unit rate. Proportional, the slope in a proportional relationship is the unit rate. If you're following along with the notes, that was a fill in the blank from the top. So we can find the unit rate from a table. Now the one on the left is not proportional. And from a table, we want to make sure our ratios are equal. And I'm going to put y over x because of slope. And I can just make a bunch of ratios out of this. So if I say 1/5, here out of this, I'm just putting y on top, and this is going to be 3/10. This is going to be 5 over 15, which is equal to 1/3, and then I have 7 over 20. Now none of those fractions are equal to each other. Our ratios are not equivalent, so this is not proportional. Now over here, this is proportional, and I'm going to go ahead again and find the unit rate. I'm finding a unit rate, and y goes on top, so 1 over 4. Here, using this second point, I'm going to have 2 over 8, which reduces to 1 over 4. 3 over 12 also reduces to 1 over 4. And 4 over 16 also reduces to 1 over 4. So my slope, if I were to write an equation here, my equation would be y equals 1/4 x. 1/4 is the unit rate. So you paid 25 cents, for example, per banana. That would be a proportional relationship. And again, all of these ratios are matching. Therefore, it's proportional. The y behind this is very important, guys. So to be able to say this table is proportional because my ratios are the same, or this equation is proportional because my y-intercept is 0, or this graph is proportional because the y-intercept is 0. That's really important, knowing the why behind whether you're saying something is proportional or not. Now we just have one step left from this section of proportional or not, and this is something that you guys already know how to do. Again, this is just a review. If I tell you that a relationship is proportional, that means we already know that the b is 0. We know that the y-intercept is 0, and then if I give you a point, so for example here, x is 8 and y is 3. Now we know all year we've been telling you guys y goes on top, x goes on bottom, so I can create my slope out of these 2 points. So my slope here is 3/8. And if I know my y-intercept is 0 because I'm telling you that this is proportional, then my equation would be y equals 3/8 x. And that's it. That's your equation, right? We don't need to write that plus 0 at the end. Just as another example, again, I'm telling you it's proportional, so I know that b is 0. And I'm going to go ahead and find my slope first. Slope is y over x, and that looks a little bit intimidating, so I'm going to think about what that means. 1 divided by half, or how many sets of 50 cents can fit into $1 is another way to think about it. 0.5 fitting into 1, and that's going to be 2, right? A half fits into 1 2 times. So my slope is 2 here, therefore my equation is y equals 2x. Again, the b is 0, you don't need to write that, so you are just done. And that is it for our proportional or not review for today.